Donald Mirren was a man of his country, a loyal soldier who fought in the war to protect the interests of his country and whose losses on the battlefield were so great that they would end up marking his destiny and conditioning the rest of his days in this world. 16 years ago, Mirren was seriously injured in the line of duty and had been living in retirement as a U.S. veteran ever since. The serious injury he suffered to his right leg prevented him from returning to the military, but also from engaging in any kind of physical activity, so he was forced to retire and completely change his way of life. He was currently living a quiet life with his wife and 2 daughters in a beautiful Alabama home. He had everything he needed, and any man could want in life. But he was not happy, and he knew he would never be happy again. Not like he used to be. Not like he was before the day that bullet went through his leg. But most of all, since his twin brother, his best friend, his confidant and companion in 1,000 battles, died by his side protecting him from enemy fire. Mirren's life seemed doomed to sadness and monotony until an unexpected event completely changed his vision of things and prompted him to do what he had never dared to do before. Something capable of touching thousands of hearts, and that would sign a truce between those who had never considered themselves good friends. It all started with the news that they were going to erect a monument on the outskirts of the city to honor the soldiers who had fallen in the war. It was the first time such a tribute would be made in the state of Alabama, and so close to home, so his wife thought it would be a good idea to all come together to pay their respects. She also thought, though this she didn't tell her husband directly, that it would be a way to get Donald to get out of the house and pay his particular tribute to his fallen comrades in combat. "What do you say, honey? Do you want to go together?" asked Francesca hesitantly. "We'll be there. Don't doubt it, Franny," he answered with a dry tone that his wife didn't know how to interpret. What she didn't know was that her husband already had his own plans in this regard, and that inside him, suddenly, and without hardly realizing it, a flame he thought had been extinguished since he was injured 16 years earlier had been rekindled. Mirren would attend the event. Of course he would, but not in the way his family expected. The tribute to the fallen would take place in Birmingham, Alabama, on August 15th at 11 p.m. The heat would be scorching, and that would make many people decide not to attend the event. But for Donald, there was no possible excuse to justify his absence from the event. The news had warned that temperatures that week would reach 40 degrees in the shade and advised all citizens to stay indoors and well hydrated to avoid heat stroke. For Donald, it was the perfect excuse to put his plan into action. A true Marine soldier is not afraid of heat or cold. On the battlefield, all that is secondary, was Mirren's reply to his wife when he asked them to stay indoors to protect themselves from the high temperatures that would be reached that day. "All right, we'll do it your way," she replied, a little hurt by the coldness with which her husband had been treating her lately. But when Francesca went to wake up her husband on the morning of August 15th to have breakfast with him, she found to her surprise that he was no longer at home. Donald Mirren's mysterious plan was already underway, and nothing and no one would be able to spoil it. The sun had not yet risen when Mirren sneaked out into the garden of his house, dressed in his Marine uniform. Just as the news had predicted, the heat was going to be hellish, and even though it was barely 7 in the morning, Mirren could already feel the weight of the hot air against his skin. It would not be an easy day, but it would be a day he would never forget. Not him, not anyone. He had it all planned, starting with sneaking out of the house and taking the family car to travel to the city of Birmingham, leaving his wife and daughters without the possibility of accompanying or joining him because they had no other means of transportation. The drive to the place where the tribute would take place was barely an hour. Donald drove fast, and inside, although he was calm, he felt his heart beating fast, and he was anxious to get there and start what he had planned. Upon arrival, Donald was a little disappointed to see so few people gathered there. "It's too hot. It's normal," he thought, trying to calm himself down and not get too excited soon. The heat at 10 o'clock in the morning was already almost unbearable, which meant that there were only about 30 or 40 people attending the event in person. The rest could watch it through their televisions, but no one was prepared for the events they would be able to witness from the comfort of their homes and through their televisions that hot day. The ceremony began punctually and lasted 1 hour. An hour full of emotion in which a precious stone plaque was raised in which the names of all those men who gave their lives for their country could be seen written. Donald stayed in a position away from the audience throughout the ceremony, right where he knew he couldn't be seen, but close enough to be able to hear and get to the center of the action in a matter of seconds. He was a soldier and was used to creating strategies according to the terrain in which they had to act. There was no enemy to fight, but for Donald, it was a mission of equal importance in which every step he took had to be millimetrically thought out and calculated. If he made one false step, his entire plan would be ruined, and he could not afford it. Speeches ended, the monument was unveiled, and the national anthem was played. The moment Donald had been waiting for had arrived. It was now or never. While everyone there sang in unison, holding a hand to their hearts, Donald came out of hiding as fast as he could. His leg hurt a lot, and the heat was terrible, and positioned himself in the middle of the action, in the middle of the stone path behind the audience and the stage where everyone was solemnly singing the anthem. When the hymn ended and the musicians rose from their seats to receive the subsequent ovation, everyone turned to look at a person who had not stopped singing and who continued to sing the hymn with a sweet and deep voice. It was Donald Mirren. The veteran stood with his right arm raised in salute and his other hand on his heart, singing his country's anthem a cappella. "Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight," sang Mirren as tears streamed down his face before the astonished gaze of everyone present. No one dared to interrupt him. Everyone remained silent, marveling at the precious act of love and patriotism that this mysterious soldier, whom no one knew, was carrying out. The veteran didn't stop looking straight ahead, nor did he stop waving his arm at any time. He was dying of heat. The thermometer hadn't stopped adding degrees since the ceremony had started, and the uniform was starting to stick to his body. But none of that seemed to matter to him. When he finished singing the anthem alone, the audience broke into jubilation around him. All the cameras were rolling, and several reporters came up to him trying to find out who he was and why he was doing that. Mirren didn't say a word to any of them. His tribute was not over yet, but neither were the surprises. And by the end of the day, Donald wouldn't be the only one who managed to surprise an entire country. Donald continued standing there, motionless, with his arm waving and his gaze fixed straight ahead. He did not move an inch, and there were those who claimed they had not even seen him blink. His leg was hurting more and more. He wasn't used to spending so much time on his feet and was starting to have a hard time, but he wasn't going to give up. The heat was stifling, and he could already feel the shirt of his suit getting soaked against his skin. He would stand for the next 3 hours and sing the anthem every hour of that day. No one dared to interrupt him or tell him to move. All those present looked on in amazement and admired his bravery. Soon the news reached all television channels and spread like wildfire through social networks. The media called him the Eternal Soldier and called his performance the greatest act of patriotism ever seen. If anyone wonders what it means to be a true soldier of the United States, there you have the answer. God bless that man, whoever he is, wrote a famous reporter in one of the country's most widely read online newspapers. As the hours passed, onlookers began to gather around Donald. Some only approached him to take a picture. Others showed their support and respect by patting him on the back or shouting from afar, "You are a source of pride for all of us," while others stood by his side and sang along with him the national anthem with each passing hour. However, the most exciting and breath-holding event in the country was about to take place, and strangely enough, Donald had nothing to do with it this time. It wasn't planned, and that's precisely what made it so special. Donald had already been standing there for more than 3 hours. The sun was still shining brightly, and the temperature was close to 40 degrees. The public remained in the shade provided by the large trees that bordered the garden where the ceremony had taken place. But Donald continued in the sun, dressed in his uniform, cap and gloves included, and his arm flexed in greeting. Donald felt his body was reaching its limit. The pain in his leg was reaching its limit, and his level of dehydration he was experiencing was starting to become dangerous. And he knew it. He couldn't hold on much longer, and if he did, he risked passing out. The soldier was preparing to leave when suddenly a distant noise broke the silence and made everyone stop looking at him to see what or who had caused it. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. At the end of the road and dressed entirely in shiny black leather, 10 bikers were speeding towards Donald. The noise made by the engines was increasing as the group of bikers approached. Donald couldn't help but be curious about what was going on. But even when they all started shouting and making comments of all kinds about the newcomers, he didn't allow himself to change his posture. A few moments later, the 10 bikers parked their motorcycles a few meters away from Donald's position, completely motionless and oblivious to what was happening around him, and slowly approached him. The people in the audience and members of the press who had set up in the area for a full report of what was happening held their breath as they watched the group of bikers approaches the brave soldier, who continued to salute and look straight ahead, without moving an inch. One of the bikers, the one who seemed to be the leader of the group, and was wearing a leather jacket full of patches and chains that jingled with every step he took, separated from his companions and approached Donald, standing just inches away from him. At that moment, a woman in her 50s in the audience, looking at the bikers as if she had just seen the very devil in leather, made a very unfortunate comment that Donald couldn't help overhearing. "They are shameless, bursting into such a solemn act with those clothes and making noise with their demonic motorcycles. We should call the police. They are a real danger to everyone," exclaimed the lady, very indignant. Many nodded in approval and joined the woman's protest with other equally unfortunate comments. However, no one dared to approach, and they merely murmured among themselves, looking at the bikers with distrust and even fear. But none of the bikers seemed to hear the comments of hatred and disapproval from the public. The biker ignored the comments and continued on his way to Mirren, stopping just in front of him. There was tension in the air. No one knew what was going to happen, or what a biker might need from a veteran in uniform. But there they were, enjoying the uncertainty. The biker saluted Donald by putting his right hand to his temple, as Donald had been doing for hours, and then reached into one of the pockets of his leather jacket, provoking the astonishment of all those present, who were convinced that he was about to pull out a knife or any other equally dangerous weapon with which to mortally wound the brave soldier. And who knows if later someone else. But what the biker was about to pull out of his pocket was not expected by anyone, not even Donald. From his jacket pocket, the biker pulled out a small bottle of cold water. "You must be thirsty, mate. You have to stay hydrated. Otherwise you won't be able to hold on much longer. It's getting too hot," he said to Donald, bringing the bottle up to his mouth so he could drink without changing position. Donald nodded gratefully and took a long drink from the bottle of water that the mysterious biker was offering him. "Thank you. It was getting to be really unbearable," Donald dared to say, speaking for the first time in hours, and breaking the silence in which he had sunk by his own will. The biker nodded, smiling, and thanked him for the effort he was making. "We have to help each other, without making any exceptions. When we saw you on TV, something ignited in my heart. You reminded me that I too am a patriot who loves his country. Thank you for reminding us all. I am sure that all these people admire you and think the same as I do. A pity they don't think the same about me and my companions," commented towards the rest of the bikers who followed him and listened to him attentively, but without daring to interrupt him. "Most people don't know what to believe, and just say what others say. Fear and ignorance prevent them from having ideas of their own that set them apart from the rest," Donald replied in a quiet voice. "You are quite right, my friend. Will you allow us to accompany you?" asked the biker finally. "Of course," Donald answered him and resumed his usual posture, looking straight ahead with a serious gesture. The audience could not believe what they were seeing and hearing, but the show had only just begun. The church clock across the street struck 6 o'clock, and the bells began to ring loudly. Another hour had passed, and Donald would sing the national anthem again, but this time he would not do it alone. The biker next to him put a hand to his heart, raised his arm in salute, and began to sing with him in unison. They sang the first few stanzas of the anthem, just the two of them, and then the other bikers joined them. All together, they sang with their hands on their hearts and their arms outstretched in salute, facing the memorial. They would soon be joined by the rest of the attendees, who excitedly raised their hands to their chests and sang loudly the anthem of the country they loved so much. An anthem to unite them all. Soldiers, bikers, and citizens. Singing that song, there were no distinctions. They were all part of the same place and the same heart. After singing the last few verses, the crowd broke into jubilant applause. Some cheered enthusiastically, while others held their hands to their faces, trying to hold back tears. Everywhere you looked, there was a different story to tell, but everyone was there for the same reason: love and respect for their country. Something unprecedented that had never happened before, and that was able to unite two totally opposite worlds, the army and the biker gangs. After that, it was quiet again. One of the bikers went to his motorcycle and took out a small umbrella to protect Donald from the sun, while another stood beside him and gently fanned him with a small one. Donald felt blessed and thanked everyone for the attention they were giving them. The rest of the bikers stood on either side of Donald and his gang leader, raising their arms in salute, and so they remained until the last rays of sunlight were hidden by the horizon. At 8 o'clock in the evening, just as the sun was beginning to dye everything a deep orange hue, Donald lowered his arm, ending his heartfelt tribute. The bikers imitated him and immediately approached him, one by one, to shake his hand and show their respect. What Donald did not expect was to meet an old acquaintance among all those men dressed in shiny black leather. "It's never easy to come back, is it, Donald?" said one of the bikers who had approached him and held out his hand. Donald was surprised to hear his name. That man must have been the same age as he was, but he could have sworn he had never seen him before. At least not looking like that. "Excuse me, "Do we know each other?" he asked, intrigued. The biker laughed and took off the sunglasses and black hat he was wearing, revealing his face and a large scar running up and down his left eye. Donald recognized it instantly. He couldn't believe it. That biker he had prejudged, like everyone else there, was his former Navy buddy Ethan James. Ethan had been with him and his brother when it was all over. They were inseparable and had lived endless adventures together. He couldn't believe he was there and had become a biker. "I understand that you have mistaken me for a criminal. Everyone does when they see us dressed like that. Don't worry, buddy," Ethan told him, amused. "Forgive me, mate. Time changes us all, but I must admit that it has treated you pretty well," said Donald, giving his old friend a big hug. Donald felt very ashamed of his prejudice and apologized to his friend and to the rest of the bikers who had helped him on such a special day for him. He then addressed for the first time the audience and the media, who were still standing there expectantly. "These men deserve as much respect as I and any of you. I admit that I too have been wary of seeing them, and I am ashamed of it. But I have learned from my mistake, and now I am trying to make it right in front of all of you. This man you see here," he said, pointing to Ethan, "served with me in the Navy, risked his life so that many of you could go on with your quiet lives at home. It doesn't matter that he now wears black leather and likes to ride a motorcycle. He is still our soldier and deserves all our respect, just like the rest of the bikers. We are all the same, no matter what we look like. Prejudice only alienates us from each other. Never forget that," Donald finished, shaking hands with his friend and the rest of the gang members. At that moment, the crowd broke into applause, and for the first time in a long time, Donald smiled and felt at peace with himself. But he didn't care about the applause or the cameras that were focused on him at that moment. The only thing that mattered to him was that he had fulfilled his promise to honor his brother's memory. And he had succeeded. Although that day, this war veteran managed to accomplish 2 feats that no one would ever forget: demonstrating his love for his country and overturning the prejudices that had been unfairly forged about motorcyclists. His story went around the country for weeks, and there was not a single newspaper that did not talk about Donald and his eternal salute to the sun. However, there was another big news story that would grab all the headlines, and whose significance was more important than any personal tribute. We should never prejudge someone by their appearance. No matter how dangerous or uncivic a person may seem to us, we will never really know who they are by going by appearances and not by what is inside their heart. We should never forget it. Did you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.